This is the Northern...
Received from the Deputy Chair. Any other apologies? No. Refer members draft minutes, pages 6 to 10. Members content they're an accurate record?
Yep. Yes. Agreed.
Matters arising, summary table request, pages 12 to 15 for noting. Moving on to draft budget. There's a response from the Minister to the committee's request for an extension to the deadline for the committee's coordinated report on the draft budget at pages 19 to 22 of your table papers. Can I advise members the Minister has not agreed to an extension and states that it is his intention to have a final draft budget document for consideration by the Executive on the 8th of January. So a draft committee report is currently being prepared based on the evidence received to date and will be tabled at next week's meeting for initial consideration. Can I also advise members that LCMs on the public sector pensions and on recovery of public sector redundancy pay were laid on the 27th of November. It is usual practice the committee issues a report on these to inform the Assembly, and these must be completed within 15 days of the laying of the memorandum, which would be the 7th of January. Can I advise members that it is likely that an additional committee meeting will be needed on the Wednesday, the 17th of December, to agree the draft reports on both LCMs and, if necessary, the final draft of the coordinated report on the draft budget.
That's fine.
Also, we had previously agreed in principle to take up an invite from the Oireachtas Joint Committee on Finance, Public Expenditure and Reform for an informal meeting. Can advise members that 5 of you had indicated availability to attend that informal meeting, but given the need for an additional committee meeting here on the 17th, the Oireachtas Committee can be asked for some alternative dates for the visit to take place early in the new year. This may also enable more committee members to attend, so a draft agenda for the informal discussion can also be agreed in the meantime. Members content with that approach? Yep. Okay. Moving on, draft budget, written briefing from NICEP. This session has been allocated 5 minutes and should be completed within 5 minutes. Can I refer members to the background paper from NICEP, pages 17 to 22 of your main pack, and the written briefing on the draft budget from NICEP, which has been tabled separately. Other submissions have been received from CBI, FSB, Irish Congress Trade Unions and NICFA on pages 181 and 184 of your main pack and pages 31 and 34 of tabled papers respectively. Can I advise members that these submissions will be reflected in the evidence used to prepare the draft committee report on the draft budget and are for noting in the meantime unless there are any queries at this stage. Members content?
Yep.
Moving on, non-domestic revaluation, update briefing from the department. This session has been allocated 20 minutes and needs to be completed by 10:30. Can I refer members to the presentation slides and background papers at pages 24 to 53 and also pages 3 to 17 of your table papers. Can I welcome Brian back to the committee again, and Alan Bronte, Director of Evaluation Services at LPS. Brian, if you're content, can we go straight into questions?
Yes, absolutely. Can I just say a couple of words by way of context? These are 3 big issues I'm here to talk to the committee today. They're not really what you would call reforms to the rating system, they're reactions. Non-domestic revaluation is a reaction to calls from the business community to redistribute the rating burden. The local government reform issue, which is about district rates convergence, is a reaction to another reform programme in relation to review of public administration. And finally, the rate rebate changes are a reaction to wider welfare reforms and changes happening throughout the UK. So I just thought I'd say that by way of context. A lot of the policies we're going to talk about this morning are underpinned by a lot of analysis. We've done a considerable amount of work both on revaluation, both on local government reform and on rate rebate. And if I'm unable to answer any of the questions today, I'll come back to the committee. There will be questions, I'm quite sure here, that we don't have all the information. I've brought half our policy unit with us, but to try and do our best to answer whatever we can. So if you can understand that. There are also 2 micro issues that micro policies that I've also written to the committee about. One is to do with the commercial window displays proposal and also the developer exclusion for domestic property. And if there is time, I'm more than happy to answer questions on that, but I do appreciate time is tight for you, so I'm in the committee's hands.
I appreciate it. Thanks for the presentation, by the way. I thought the PowerPoint presentation was quite useful in terms of an overview. So we have a sense now of how it's going to affect different council areas. We've got some anecdotal evidence in terms of businesses in our respective constituencies. But could you give us a sense of the overall economic impact in terms of these proposals? Because obviously there will be some areas under the 2003 valuation that would have been prime properties at that time, and now the reverse is true. So how will it impact in those areas perhaps that are more derelict, run down now? With the reduction in rates in those areas, are there opportunities in terms of regeneration? And also, how will this affect some of the new growth areas within places like Belfast?
Yeah, well, I think maybe it's better if I pass over to Alan, but I would say that what the department has done is to publish these values earlier than ever before, to afford ratepayers the opportunity to look at their new values and to ask themselves whether that represents a fair estimate of rental value in today's property market. In terms of the overall revenues, as the committee will know, this is a redistribution exercise. We are not going to be raising any more money in real terms from the revaluation process, but I understand your question is more about the differential impact of the revaluation on sectors and locations, so it'll be better if I pass over to Alan.
Yeah, I mean, what Brian said is very helpful, because I think there are two. We tend to talk about rates as a single tax. There really are two taxes here. We've got the district rate and the regional rate, as you well know, and therefore, when you're looking at the analysis, you have to look at them in many ways as two different items. So if we, for example, take a district council area where there has been a substantial rise, 17–18% in the total value as now valued of that council area, clearly that council area, and I know it's complicated then as well by moving from 26 to 11, but clearly at a council level, at a district rate level, that district council will not want to take 17% more in terms of revenue. So the rate poundage has to be adjusted in order to recover the same amount of revenue. And that 17% point, therefore, becomes the tipping point for people who will pay more, who will pay less. Now, there are many other things that we can't take into account at this stage. We can't take into account the spending profile of the new council, the effective rate convergence, the regional rate, etc. But if we try to isolate the revaluation on its own, so a 17% increase in an NAV, if someone's getting the average increase, they really effectively from the revaluation will pay no more. And if they're somewhere between 0 and 17%, they will be better off. And so it's quite difficult at this stage to get that information over. It is adjusted, therefore, by the regional rate. So when you try to put the two things together, where you've now got an 8% increase at Northern Ireland 11, say it's 17% increase, the effect is somewhere in between. So as a rough guide, we've tried to give that, and actually those figures are in the pack. So yes, revaluation will definitely mean people will pay more, and a number of people will pay less. And at a Northern Ireland level, 49% of ratepayers are below the Northern Ireland average. 61% of retail properties are below the Northern Ireland average. So when you look at it at that high level, 50% of warehouses, 54% of manufacturers. So it's a very balanced, when you look at it at a stand back, it's a very balanced matter. And that's what revaluation is doing. It's rebalancing business rates. At this stage, we can't give precisely the figures what people pay, because I can't second guess the district rate. However, there are sectors, and I think those are already well advertised as some of the winners and some of the losers. However, I think as well, if I might say, that some of the headline figures, for example, of Central Belfast, with a 50% reduction in certain prime retail areas. We're following the market. We're not setting out here to in any way re-engineer business rates. That's not my job. My job is to follow the market. And if the market has decided that there's a substantial reduction in prime shops in Belfast, that's where it is. Where there are some areas that have seen a growth since 2001, and that's 12 years of growth, where there is 12-20% growth. Those properties in many of those areas are still paying substantially less than even a shop in Donegal Place or Belfast, and you'd expect that to be for sometimes 20 times. So you could have a 20% increase to get to £3,000 of a shop and of an NAV, and you could have the same size of shop in Donegal Place with a rateable value of 50, 60,000. So it's a lot about scale, and until we get the rate bills, we're not going to be able to talk about what the liability is. It's quite a difficult area. I know it's a bit of a, but we need to get away from the percentages at this stage. And as Brian said earlier, could I have rented my premises for the NAV figure? That's my job at the minute. This phase is about ensuring that that NAV is correct. If it's wrong, LPS are here to fix it. And we're happy to fix it at this stage. And it's important that people stand back and let's not worry about the minute the percentage changes or the multipliers or all these things. Does that rateable value figure equal what I could have rented the shop for? If it's wrong, if that's not the case, then contact us. We're very happy. And we have changed some already. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. How far can we drill down into these figures? Because obviously we have the overhead figures for the council areas, but some of those council areas are quite big. Causeway Coast and Glens goes from Coleraine all the way over to Cushendall. Can we get specific figures in terms of individual towns and individual sectors? So I want to look at Ballymena, I want to look at retail, I want to look at Coleraine for manufacturing. Are those easily drawn down? The members of the public, and can they be given to the committee?
Yeah, I mean, we're just about to put on the website 26 different local versions of the FAQ booklet that I've supplied to the committee. And so that's a very Northern Ireland view. We're just about to put on the website that information brought down to council level, and perhaps that. I'm very happy actually to provide those documents directly to the committee, but they will be on the website and they will be at a 26 council level. So they will give you examples of some of the rises and some of the falls in the sectors. And of course, the information is there available to the public on the website, and every single property can be looked at and contrasted with the two values.
Adrian, you're looking on that point?
Yeah, just on that there, will it be broken down, Alan, into streets in towns, or what way will be broken down?
But it's quite difficult to go. Where do we go? We can give you, because even if we go into one street, there will be different effects at one end of the street to the other. But what is happening? What is happening
that's
here?
That's the problem. That's what people's finding that there, and they're saying, "Way up in that end of the street, this is so much cheaper than going to be down this end of the street."
Well, yeah, because the market has decided that in a way, and I think what is happening generally, and it might be helpful just to say that there is a flattening out of the market overall. So we've got the top level has come off the prime towns centres. Some of that value has gone out to the retail parks. But even in a town centre, and if I take somewhere like Coleraine, you've got the main street, which has fallen in value, but some of the secondary, tertiary areas have actually risen a little bit, and so the top is meeting the second and third level, so there's a flattening out of the value. But what happens over time, and over 12 years, patterns of people change, directions change, people shop in different ways, even the pedestrian flows change. So it does happen that one end of the street will come up and the other end will go down, and that's just the market. What we have sought to do, and it's really important that we understand that everything we have done is evidence-based. We have taken the evidence from the market, we've taken the evidence from ratepayers. We asked ratepayers to provide us with if they were renting a property, of that information. We have taken that information away and analysed it. So we're following the market, we're following the patterns and not making them. And that's why I say if we have misinterpreted a figure, if we've got a figure that is wrong, this is a good time to get it changed.
But, you know, take Coleraine, for example, the Diamond Centre is substantial reduction.
They're one of the winners.
Yes, and that's a very good illustration of why you need revaluations. And it's been such a long time since the previous revaluation. Last time the revaluation was undertaken, shops in every town in Northern Ireland were advertising £1 to £1. You know, that's how long back the change is. It's a very long time in terms of all the social, economic and changes and the transformation in the way people shop and the way people live, the way people spend their leisure time and so on. And all of that is
The Diamond
reflected.
Centre, Brian, to Railway Road in Coleraine. You know, it's not that far apart, but Railway Road's getting a fair big height
Yeah.
compared to the town centre, and it's part of the town centre. Like.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what, and I mean, yeah, and I understand that point, and it's a good one. But it is maybe reinforces my point here that it's not about the change. The change is important when we get to the liability, but at this stage, what we have to say is, are the figures that we've put on the shops in Railway Road, do those represent what people could have rented those shops for? Now, they may be seeing an increase, and I think Queen Street in Coleraine is another area where substantial increase. But yeah, that's fine, and that's an analysis of what has happened and what the change is. But the important thing is now, do those figures on those shops in Queen Street represent the rental value of those shops now? The Diamond Centre has reduced in value. You know, there may actually, I just can't remember, but there may actually still be a higher value in the Diamond Centre, even though it's come down by 30%. It's come down to 30% of what it was. I don't know, but we need to look at what the value is on it now. And this is the time when we get the basis right for moving forward. And it's not, we're not adjusting on a percentage basis. We're saying, this is the value. Is that value right? And, you know, we can look at Railway Street and we can look at Queen Street and say, are we now at the right levels? And if we are or not, we adjust it.
Okay, Paul.
Just on that point, and it's to come back on an issue about the numbers of people who actually have taken up the opportunity to come back. And you did say at the start that that a number of them have been readjusted. Is there any areas where there seems to be a large volume of that, or is it a fairly even spread right across the whole province?
To be honest, at this stage, we have very little
Feedback.
in the way of contact. We certainly are under, even in terms of in total telephone calls, contacts of some sort, we're certainly under 1,000, under 1,000. We've less than 1,000 contacts at this stage.
Can I ask?
And of that, we're clearing a very high percentage of those contacts at first point of contact through Northern Ireland Direct. So by phone call, most people are seeking an explanation or help me find the property, help me understand what this means. And many people are satisfied at that first point of contact. There are a number then that are being referred on to valuers. But at this stage, it's just too early to give even any figures at all on what's being changed. You know, it's not. There's certainly not. There's not high enough volume to even look at that yet.
A lot of individuals and speaking to a lot of traders on this issue were they'll not probably be totally aware until the rate bill hits their floor.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's when it's effectively going to challenge. And as I have been saying, and I did attend a meeting run by the NERTA, where they actually were trying to inform some individuals who thought it was just another process it was going through and weren't really totally aware of how this whole thing was working out. So there seems to still be a lack of understanding upon many within the retail end as to how this is going to affect, or within the commercial end, how this is going to affect them. And I know we have, that you've done your part in trying to make them aware about this revaluation, but I still think we're going to have a large number of challenges whenever the rates bills hit in April.
I think you're right.
Yeah, and that's understandable. And in many ways, people, if you're if, as I described earlier, you know, you're somewhere in that marginal zone, you probably, and I noticed recently some professional advisors actually saying to people, do wait until they strike the rate to see whether you know you're going to be
But there's not
better
going-
off or not. You know,
But most people are, you know, we still have got the regional rate idea. We're fairly sure about what it's
Yeah,
going to be from the local rates and what's set down from the domestic rate section or from council. You know, it's not going to be that big a hike on many occasions, but you know that proportion is there, and where there is major fluctuations because of RPA, there will be the help to actually help converge that. But you know, I'm happy enough in some of the feedback I've received from one town, and I'm talking about Ballyclare. Some people are quite saying, well, if after doing what you've said, if we can expect maybe somewhere around maybe 2% of a rise, allow council to give maybe a 2% rise, whatever that might be. But if you calculate that in, the part that they're involved in, which works out about 40% of the total odd budget.
Yeah.
And if you calculate that in and you're saying, well, look, your rate bill is going to be somewhere around that. If you're using this new valuation, most of them are saying, yes, they're happier at the process. And I think the levelling has tried to be as fair as possible in relation to footfall and how it's working.
well, in a way, you will appreciate that I don't set out in any
No, I
way
know
to be fair. Otherwise, we're setting out to be accurate assessment of the value. You know, reacting to what the market is telling us.
Yeah.
I think the point that is maybe is, again, that perhaps is missed is where you do get that large percentage in value, you will have to get that adjustment down. So that's where it's quite difficult to work out. And then sometimes with 2-3 councils coming together, it is going to be quite difficult to call. Maybe just going back to your previous point, yes, I mean, I think we're still going to have a reasonable number of people who will go through the formal process come the 1st of April. I mean, we're very keen to talk to people and I try and explain at this stage. That does not in any way then preclude them from coming back and making an official challenge in April. I think it's important that people do contact us, and we do have the opportunity of explaining, and as I say, where we can really look at figures, and we've been out and actually looked at some properties as well. And I would just, through the committee, encourage people to do that and to look at it. We have put adverts in most of the regional papers to draw attention to the website, and we've used other means of also getting that message out, working with the like of NERTA and FSB, and we will continue to do that with all of the other stakeholder groups to try and explain where we are and encourage people to consider the new value so it doesn't become a surprise on the mat at the 1st of April. That's not something we would welcome.
Martin?
Thank you. I'm not old enough to remember 2001, but Michaela tells me there's a bit of a boom going on then in property values. But to get back to today, I'm wondering, because you're saying very much as a market-led exercise, I mean, you just looked at the facts and come up with results. But I'm wondering, what are the economic impacts we should expect from this? You spoke about some sort of broad brush changes, including in city centres. I'm very interested in the bids process, which is another department, of course, which is linked to this. And one of the pushback against the business improvement district ideas was the traders were saying we're paying too much rates, so we didn't want to have this additional little tax. So I don't know if matters economic are in your brief or not, but what would we like to see from this as people who are concerned with regenerating the economy?
Well, maybe I see something maybe past to Brian, but I mean, in terms of coming from my position as a surveyor and involved in the market, if I look at Belfast City Centre, which you're very familiar with, there are areas in Belfast City Centre that at present are unlettable because the business rates are too high. The market was telling us that, the traders were telling us that, and having analysed the market and having the opportunity to do a revaluation has actually proved that point. So the Donegal places and the Castle Lane top end, you'll be well aware, is virtually a vacant zone. Now, what's happening here is that the occupation cost of taking a shop in Castle Lane or Donegal Place is going to drop substantially. There are other areas, for example, if we take Arthur Street, which in 2001 was, not a very well shopped area. We now know its popularity in terms of its closeness to Victoria Square. So in that area, the rents have risen, and the rates will rise in there. And so there is that balancing out now. And I imagine that if you can take that for Castle Court, again, the tenant mix has changed, and because business rates were too high, and so there now is the opportunity to actually, I think, we'll see some new life coming back into our city centres, and other areas that don't forget that whenever the revaluation took place in 2001, I'm not sure whether Victoria Square was even on the being thought up. But we're now in a position where Victoria Square is there. The patterns have changed. They've drawn value away, and we're now reflecting that. So I can see in Belfast, in Coleraine, Ballymena Church Street was an example in the past. A number of these areas where now business rates are going to go into more into an equilibrium, because in many ways, rent is the proxy in a way here for fairness. So if someone can afford something in a rent, then in a sense there's a balance there in terms of rates. And so I think some of our town centres will be new life, because I think they'll be able to let property again. Some of that value in the rating system has gone out to retail parks, and so it should. So I'm not sure whether that helps. And maybe Brian has
it's a good question in terms of the economic impact. I would say probably the best thing it's doing is removing a distortion. In terms of the property market is affected by the imposition of a tax base dating back to 2001. Putting that on a 2013 basis removes a distortion in terms of businesses themselves, but also in terms of investment. So it does have that positive effect, and it also rebalances the rating burden, so that sectors and locations that are more successful will pay more in rates, those that are less successful will pay less. So that's the kind of very high level picture. Of course, there are complications within that, but in terms of the overall economic impact, I think that's what it does. But you also asked a question about bids, and of course, bids are a self-help kind of initiative. They're a voluntary initiative. If businesses within a particular area want to form a bid and raise more money using the rating system, they can do that, and they can vote to do that. But there's no obligation on them. So, I mean, I do understand individual businesses will want to factor in what their current liability is and whether they can afford a supplement on the rating system. But there's certainly no compulsion associated with that. So,
If a majority vote for it, everyone has to.
yeah, well, I think so. This is not my specialist area. It's DSD policy, but we do know that they're using the valuation list as a means of distributing bid levies, and but they are on a voluntary basis. So I don't think the creation of bids is something that's going to create an additional burden without people agreeing to it.
Yeah, no, I'm actually in favour of bids. One of the problems has been people have been reluctant to commit because of the rate. So I'm sort of, I'll speak later. I'll kind of around Lisburn Road and areas like that, which felt a fair bit of pain, and I don't know if they've gone down or not onto this.
Yeah.
But
but it is a useful thing that we have this early production of the valuation list, because it then will give people an idea of what proportionally they would pay under a bid. Okay. And I think the first bid is to be in Ballymena. That's the first one that's going to run. So at least we now have the new values in which they can base the levies.
Thank you.
You see, Brian, in terms of where the rates burden is now shifting to, how big a shock is that in some areas? You know, if you're going from a base where there was a very, very low rate, underdeveloped in 2001, to where we are now, could it be the case that a number of businesses whose overheads were manageable are now unmanageable?
Yeah.
You know, so
I mean,
the other side of the coin.
The two sectors that come to mind are the pub trade in the cathedral area, who are facing substantially increased rates, and secondly, wind farms are another good example of where they were at a very low base back in 2001, and as a sector they will face significant increases. Whether that is the impact on the ratepayers themselves in terms of affordability, I don't know. The new values reflect the success of those areas or those sectors. and so that change is long overdue. I think if we were to have had that revaluation back in 2010, they would have faced significant increases at that stage as well. So,
Yeah, but the licensed trade is another good example to talk about, because sometimes we, you know, as Brian is well illustrated, you know, we can't talk about the very high multipliers in somewhere like Cathedral Quarter and Ann Street or whatever, and there are public houses that will see substantial rises, but 50% of public houses in Northern Ireland will be better off. So, you know, there are just things that are changing here. So there are 50% of them will be better off because of revaluation, because the smaller pub is not as, you know, it's not doing as well as in the past, and there's many pubs that have gone out of business. But 50% of them will be better off. But yet there are other ones at the top end that are huge turnovers and are now in very popular areas, and they will see the change, and so they should. And that's why we need to do a revaluation.
And with the rates, I mean, obviously it's still the same money's coming in at the end of the day in terms of this revaluation. But how is that broken down in terms of councils then? Because the overall figure is going to stay the same, but if there's a change in terms of, I mean, you're talking about wind turbines there, and obviously some council areas will have a lot more than others, and if they're going to contribute largely in places like Causeway Coast and Glens,
Yeah.
is that a benefit to that council area as a whole?
But that's only affecting that in terms of the differential movement in regional thing. It really only affects, in a sense, the regional rate, that regional rate element of the bill. If you have a large increase in value in a council area because you have several wind farms, that just gives that council, in a sense, that it just gives them a larger base. And so if you see that large increase in that council area, they'll be able to drop the rate poundage to bring in the same money. So in the district rate, you know, what's happening inside the district council area, it's really about the, you know, district rate. Where you get substantial movement of value, and there would have to be substantial movement in one council area compared to the other, then that may affect what people pay in the regional rate element of the bill. But the value rising and falling within the council area has virtually only, you know, the individual effect, obviously, but if you follow what I'm trying to say.
yeah, it's illustrated in your pack, the 12 new councils, what the impact of the revaluation, and thankfully every council is facing some modest growth. I've reported to this committee before. My concern before was actually tax base value, the aggregate value in each of the new council areas would reduce, and that would have an impact on the poundage, which would be politically very difficult to deliver. But at least we are faced with modest growth in each of the, thankfully, in each of the new councils, despite my predictions of doom.
John?
Thanks, Chair. I wouldn't want to interrupt the happiness now. Get over that, and this close to Christmas. It's more around that idea of, and the Chair touched on, once you rebalance anything, you're going to have winners and losers.
Yep.
And whether in losing we end up driving some small, effectively small businesses out, and how do we manage any of that? And I realise that's maybe hard to predict until you actually almost have worked out every individual bill as to what it's going to mean for every individual. But I'm just aware that in rebalancing anything, you will have a winner or a loser.
I think one of the things I touched on earlier, Mr. McAllister, is that there are switches and changes going on here. But in many ways, what has happened is that certainly in the retail area, where we're seeing the large change in the prime street, the prime shopping street, there's many of the multinationals that were on the main streets, and the value has come out of that area. We're still talking about some very low values in many of our rural towns and villages, and whereas there is a small change or maybe a larger change, we're still substantially different. And I said earlier, you know, so if we take somewhere like Kilkeel or Annalong, where you have 1,000 square foot shop, the NAV, now And we know that, you know, we could take 60% of that would be roughly where the NAV of a 1,000 square foot shop in Annalong is about £4,500, or in Kilkeel is about 6,000. That same shop in Victoria Square would be 78,000, even after the sort of reductions that we've talked about. Or in Donegal Place, it could be 57,000. So they're exactly the same size of shop. So yes, there is a change here, but we haven't rewritten entirely the way business rate. There's an adjustment, but it's not. There are still substantial differences, and what we need to do is say, well, could that shop in Annalong or Kilkeel is 5,000, 6,000 reasonable in terms of the rent? So we're at the minute, I think, quite distracted by the percentage changes, but I think we need, the sooner we get to those sort of core issues, perhaps. Your point is still valid. The person in the £4,000-5,000 NAV is going to be paying £2,000-3,000, but then small business rate relief. Well applied.
Yeah, but your question's about whether we need policies to help manage the change for some ratepayers. And this is the whole issue of transitional relief following the revaluation. Now, we have never had a broadly based transitional relief scheme associated with any revaluation in Northern Ireland. The one that we had previously was directed at very small properties. But since then, we've introduced the small business rate relief scheme. And as part of a public consultation we undertook last summer into the future of the small business rate relief scheme, respondents were very clear that they would prefer the retention of small business rate relief compared to having a transitional scheme for revaluation. There's also the fact that transition schemes can be very complex and they can be very expensive. There's nothing in the current draft budget for a transitional relief scheme, but you've also got to remember that in the draft budget there's set aside £20 million for retention of small business rate relief next year, and then an additional £30 million in relation to the topic I'm going to talk about next, which is managing district rates convergence. So there are affordability issues associated as well. And also the small business rate relief in itself provides relief to a lot of local traders who may well face increases. So that's a help.
I'd certainly be, you know, being supportive of small business rates relief. I suppose in some of this, you just seem to have a lot of factors coming together at once.
Yes.
You know, in normal circumstances, you might do a revaluation, but you wouldn't do a revaluation and have reform of local government kicking off all, you know, effectively in the one,
Yes.
1st of April, all in one day, nearly, that you're kicking all of these things off, and that can just be difficult to manage.
Yeah.
And also, it is managing through that transition, that there are no major shocks to the system in quite a small area, that you have somebody that is getting a large reduction. And accept Alan's point about that you know, once you set the rate can be adjusted down. If your value's up over all the council area, your poundage rate will be going down.
Yes.
Because you only want the same tax take, or Paul suggests 2%, you know, a modest rise maybe. But it's those people I'm concerned about that you have that are at either end of the scale, and I expect they might be a small number, and some might be very, very happy with your work, and others, you know, it could potentially, I think, as colleagues have pointed out, it could potentially put enormous pressure on that business.
Yeah, it's very difficult to develop policies to legislate for every eventuality. I mean, in terms of what ratepayers facing a new bill that they can't afford, what can they do? Well, there are essentially really two things. One is to challenge the valuation for a start. So whether, if they think it's too high, challenge that, and it can get reduced. Or they can ask LPS to cut them a bit of slack in terms of a repayment plan. So those are really the two measures that are available. And having a transition scheme, we've consulted on it. The view was we'd rather have a small business rate relief scheme There's the issue of complexity, there's the issue of affordability associated with that. And I suppose you could say, and it's not an answer that I would want to give to an angry ratepayer, but those that are facing increases have benefited from the absence of a revaluation for many years. You know, had there been a revaluation as was planned in 2010, they would have faced an increase then. But that's cold comfort to somebody who's trying to run a business and then is faced with increasing outgoings. I understand that. So I think in terms of practical measures, A, challenge the valuation, and B, talk to LPS about a sensible repayment plan.
Would you be broadly hoping that the numbers faced with that would be fairly limited?
We
you
would
know,
hope so,
overall,
yeah.
and you're happy to, you know, the message for us to take to other constituents is, look, engage fully with LPS to see what measures can be done. Make sure you're.
Yep, but talk to them early. Don't talk to them when you get into real financial distress.
Yeah, and I mean, our advice at the minute to all ratepayers is, you know, go on the website if they can. If they can't, then there's a telephone number. Go on and look. You know, as I said earlier, I'm going to bore you by saying, does this represent the rental value of my property? How does it compare to similar ones, you know, on either side of me or the same street? No point in going across Belfast or across another town. Look at it close up. See, well, how does it compare with the one next door, if that shop's similar, or the office? We keep talking about shops, but we cover all properties. Have a look at similar properties nearby. The website's very easy to use, and it will actually show you up the current value, the new value. You can go and search the whole street. You can search, other similar businesses that have similar size to you. So, does it represent a fair value? How does it compare with others? Perhaps talk to the professional advisor that would normally advise, and give us a call. Our folks are there willing to chat. This is the time to talk, and it perhaps will remove the uncertainty, and business needs certainty. And we appreciate that councils and the regional rate won't be struck until February. That's not that long away now, but anything that we can do to remove uncertainty and to give people some either comfort or help them prepare will be useful for business, I think.
I mean, the headline in terms of, talking about impacts here, the headline is out-of-town food-based superstores will be paying considerably more. Many high street shops, in fact, maybe the majority of high street shops will be paying less. But within that, there are still some unexpected results of this revaluation, which are going to create difficulties for some traders. We fully understand that. So,
maybe I can just say that one of the ones that where we'll be getting, and Mr. Frew asked me earlier, some of the calls are coming around some of the convenience type stores, and perhaps some of them that are attached to petrol stations. Mm-hmm. But again, we're recognising that there's a huge change in the way we all shop. For many people, you listen to Tesco's and Sainsbury's, people aren't doing the large weekly shop. They're shopping in many ways on the way home. They're shopping at all hours, and literally these small style convenience supermarkets are now well placed. They're always well positioned. And we know that the rental value of those properties, particularly those ones connected to a petrol filling station, there isn't as much margin in the petrol. It's in the shop. And scattered throughout Northern Ireland, where there will be quite large increases in some of those style of properties, and we are getting calls about that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Okay, Elizabeth.
Yeah, just Brian, you say it's a very important point. I think it's one sort of an argument that we can all use. This is revenue neutral, isn't that right, overall?
yes, in real terms, yes.
In real terms, but when you look at the NAV, all the growth is positive, right? So that therefore means that the councils, in applying the multiplier, the actual rate in the pound, are really going to have a reduction.
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
Yeah, but this happens at every revaluation.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Let me ask you, what's the reality of this happening? What's the chances of it happening?
Well, to go back to a point Mr. McAllister said, this is happening at the same time as local government reform, so there are all sorts of other things influencing rate bills and the continuation of small business rate relief and so on and so forth. So, all other things being equal, an increase, even a modest increase in value, and the total value of the valuation list this new list compared to today's list should lead to a corresponding reduction in poundages both at district council level and at regional rate level as well.
But you know, Brian, on the regional rate, we already agreed to restrict it to inflation. It's going to go up.
Well, what I would say to that in terms of the commitment to do that would be to increase regional rate revenues by inflation. The rate, because we're talking apples and pears, we're talking a rate struck against 2001 values compared to this new list, which is a rate going to be struck against 2013. They're different currencies, they're different, it's a different basis, so we can't use, you can't say that this year's regional rate is the benchmark for next year's increase, because the whole pack has been shuffled, but the pack is also slightly increased in size. So it's a different currency. So in terms of the commitment is about overall regional rate revenues, not about an indexing of the current regional rate.
I just use that as an example. I can't see any chance at all of this not producing extra costs, because all of those councils will increase at least by inflation. If you have a positive growth times a multiplier, people will be paying more. The other thing that worries me though is utilities up roughly 1.5%.
Yeah.
Now that's going to work its way back into all of our bills.
Well, there are two aspects. The two big ones I'll talk about are Northern Ireland Water, which is 80% funded through public expenditure. So there's no domestic water charges in Northern Ireland, so there's no flow back to consumers here. But in terms of Northern Ireland Electricity, which is potentially facing a significant increase in their liability, that is not a carry-through or a pass-through to consumers, and that has been decided by I think it was the Competition Commission ruling of a couple of years ago. So legally, NIE are not allowed to pass that on to consumers, and the protection for consumers, of course, comes from the regulator. So that effect should not happen in relation to that. I know, Alan, do you want to say anything more about some of the other?
Power stations overall are coming down. The three power stations, if you look at the total value, it's down. The Ballylumford, Kilkira are both down. Kilroot is up. It's up because coal's so cheap at the minute. So power generation overall will be down. The wind generation is obviously up, and some very big headline figures there. But that is literally Northern Ireland catching up. So the rest of the UK has seen substantial increases in the rateability of wind turbine wind farms, and we're basically just playing catch up. And so any operator and the umbrella organisation were well aware of the fact that there would be substantial changes there. So it's not all. Certainly will not all impact on consumers.
I hope you'll come back at the end of February and we'll look at the figures then and see what has happened.
But as Brian said, this is not new. I mean, I'm so old. I remember in Belfast, whenever the rate in the pound was at least £3 in the pound, in the 1997 reval, it changed to about 40p, and so and a similar adjustment was made in 2003. I mean, as this started.
No, the rate in the pound's fine. I'm talking about the net revenue at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I can only see that going up.
But yeah, it adjusted down so that the revenue was more or less the same. I think all that we can do is actually, and why we're talking about some of the figures, is to try to isolate revaluation in itself, because there are a number of processes here in play, and all that we can do at this stage is to try to isolate what revaluation is doing. Rate convergence is another issue, and the actual spending profile of the council is something I unfortunately not responsible for.
It's just a very good argument Brian uses, and I use too, but cost neutral at the end of the day. But I don't think it's going to be now. That's my point. Anyway, enough, Chair. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Leslie. Okay, moving on to the next session then, members. Thank you very much, Alan.
Okay, thank you.
And we'll get you advance copies of the 26 council packs, so
Yes.
so they can be distributed around the committee. I think that would help you.
Excellent. Okay, members, managing convergence of district rates. Can I refer you to pages 55 to 56 of your packs. Brian, in correspondence to the committee, the department indicated that the estimate cost is expected to be very close to the maximum funding made available.
Yep.
In terms of where we are now, is the 30 million still going to be sufficient?
Well, we think so. I mean, this district rates convergence scheme is a culmination of really 2 years' work. We've been working alongside colleagues in DOE, not every day of the year, but it has been a progression over a couple of years. It started off back in 2 years ago when we put a paper to the executive saying that we can identify a need for some intervention because of the divergence in district rates over the years, and we suggested a 2 or 3 year scheme to the executive at that time at a possible cost of up to 30 million. We have now been able to stretch that to a 4 year scheme, but we're kind of at the maximum there. The Minister has announced it. There's provision in the draft budget for next year, a cost of I think 15 million. So as we think we'll need it all. We think, as far as we're concerned, it's secure in relation to the budget process is still ongoing, but it's as certain as anything else.
And what is the breakdown for every year in terms of cost?
Do you know the breakdown? Yeah, it would be about 12 million year one, 9 million in year two, 6 million in year three, and 3 million in year four. That's kind of the current profile on that. Don't know whether that adds up. I've rounded there, so I hope that adds up to 30 million.
In terms then of the mid-term review that needs to be carried out,
Yes.
what are the potential implications of a shortfall arising from that review, and how would DFP react?
Well, we're going to be very carefully monitoring the spend on this, but we're also going to be monitoring the effectiveness of this in terms of impact on ratepayers. And I can't prejudge what that review will say, but we are obliged under the Local Government Act to undertake that review. But as also part of good policy making, we'd always want to do that. But it is a mechanism that we can use to make sure that we stay on budget. It will, of course, by that time be a separate mandate, and it's whether it's up to an executive whether they want to stay within the £30 million envelope.
And when exactly is that mid-term review in terms of the date?
Well, if it's a 4 year scheme, that would be after 2 years, and we'd have to do it actually slightly before the end of 2 years, because if we were to make any changes, we've got to make sure that LPS, that's fed through to LPS, so they can make the necessary adjustments to the billing system.
So many months previous to.
It's likely to be there early autumn in advance of the, I think it's the 17 year.
Yeah, early autumn 2017.
Okay. Any questions, members? With intent? Okay. Thank you.
Just before moving on, councils, there was something released to council within the last few days in relation to the amounts coming through to them. Would that be correct? Was there some paper sent through?
We have published figure work showing what we think the distribution of it will be by district council area, by the current district council area. And this is a scheme that is mainly to do with Castlereagh, Fermanagh, Dungannon, Strabane, Coleraine, and Lisburn, and so on. So we've produced, I think it may well be in your packs, I'm not sure that's what we have produced recently.
Did they only get that within maybe the last week?
Yes, yeah.
Would that give a lot of them enough time to actually, because I appreciate most councillors are actually going through their process of calculations at the present moment in time of where they're going, even talking about the new councils?
Well, this is a subsidy being applied directly to rate bills, so we would expect councils just to go through their normal process. Well, they're new councils, expect them to go through the normal rate setting process, and that subsidy will be applied automatically by LPS to ratepayer bills, so there'll be no there'd be no grant money going to councils in relation to that, so it shouldn't interfere with the district rate setting.
That's fine.
Although clearly they have political interest in how this is distributed.
I think Nilga wanted some interference in that aspect, did they not?
I'm not sure actually, and Nilga have been extremely helpful to us in terms of facilitating the consultations and providing very thorough responses to the consultation and bringing together a lot of the views of local government. So I'm not quite sure what the issue is there.
No, it's just appreciate there was some meeting yesterday where this was discussed in detail.
Right.
The convergence aspects of Nilga, but that's fine.
Right. Well, I'm in pretty regular contact with Nilga, so maybe I'll follow up and see if there are any issues arising out of that meeting, and we'll see what we can do.
That's great, thank you.
Okay,
Chair,
members.
just before we move on, a quick one. Will that be out in the rates bill? Will they see the convergence
Yes.
on the rates bill? So
It'll be
people will see it?
identified in everybody's individual rate bill as to what the subsidy will be, and this will not just be domestic ratepayers, it will be non-domestic. The only exclusions from this scheme are those that are already have their rates standardised in social housing, and also the public sector property. Public sector property will not benefit from this.
Fair
So
enough.
that's not a cost-cutting exercise. That was to try and get more
free.
more to individual ratepayers and to allow us to do a 4-year scheme.
Okay. Moving on to the next session now on rebate replacement arrangements. Thank you, Samuel. This has been allocated 20 minutes, but we are about 10 minutes behind time. I refer members to the consultation page 58 to 59 of your meeting pack. Brian, do you want to just introduce this session, given
Yep.
the lapse of time since we last considered it?
Okay, thanks for the opportunity, this very early opportunity to talk about our recent consultation that we've launched. This is the third consultation we have undertaken, and it's because of the delay in universal credit that this affords us the opportunity to go to a longer term scheme. The previous 2 consultations were related to how can we get the current scheme to work with universal credit for a period so that claimants were not disadvantaged. And the previous 2 consultations also looked at how we could deal with the shortfall in funding. This particular consultation is not concerned about that. That will be an executive decision in due course in terms of how much funding is applied. So this is to do with the entitlement rules to a new rate rebate scheme, probably from about April 17. We would have thought that's the kind of timescale we're working to. The reason we're doing it now is because there's a lead-in time, and LPS need at least 28 months to develop new systems and develop new processes and to train staff and to ensure that all the integration work in terms of getting data and so on to do that. So that's why we're doing it now. It is a future policy, April 17, but as I say, because of that lead-in time, it's necessary to start. And the consultation is really about the rules of entitlement. There are also some other simplification issues raised in terms of currently under housing benefit, there are a lot of changes in year to people's entitlement, and we're not sure whether that is sensible or proportionate in a system that delivers support of maybe maximum £500 a year to individuals. Now that's a lot of money, but in terms of it being proportionate to what's paid under housing benefit, where rent is also included, we believe a simpler system is more appropriate where we're dealing with an annual taxation system. And we would prefer that the money went to claimants rather than in needless administration. So there are 2 models set out in the consultation. Model A, which is really our preferred model, is to make entitlement to universal credit as a prerequisite for entitlement to rate rebate, and to have a fairly automated system so people don't have to fill in 2 sets of forms or be subjected to a means test. And this uses the universal credit maximum amount. That's the amount that the government has determined a person or family needs to live on, and that would be the income threshold. And universal credit would be treated as income. So those below that maximum income threshold would have automatic entitlement. Those above that, slightly above that, there are disregards and tapers applied to ensure that there's no cliff edges. And all the information required for this award would be available from a Universal Credit Award Notice. And certainly in the longer term, we would like to think this would be an automatic electronic feed. Maybe in the shorter term, it may require some manual processing, but our longer term aim is that this will be automatic. The option B is essentially built on...
Just on that point, Brian, you're saying about there would need to be some manual inputting. How much would that be, and how much resource would be required?
Yeah, well, we haven't fully done. We've asked LPS to provide us with figures on that, and they are working on that at the moment. But this would require LPS or whoever is administering this to transcribe the information that's set out on a Universal Credit Award Notice. But eventually, we would hope that that would be all done electronically. And in this day and age, I think it's perfectly possible. And certainly, we believe we have all the data protection provisions that we need to allow us to do that. So,
but how cumbersome
Well, if we
would it be?
just even said that even in comparing to the current scheme, there's so little information. You're just lifting information that's already been dealt with through Universal Credit, and you're just lifting about 5 pieces of information to do that. So even if you had to do it manually, it would be very, very quick. And administratively easy to do.
Yeah,
it really would.
Option B is essentially the model that we consulted on before, which does apply a means test and does require more administrative effort. So as I say, option A is our favoured one. We have got a lot of analysis underpinning this consultation that we're more than happy to talk about at future sessions, but at the moment, are there any particular questions you want to ask us about this? As I say, unlike the previous consultations, we are not addressing the issue of how to deal with the shortfall in funding, because this is a welfare reform that has already been implemented from April 13. We've 10% less funding applied from Whitehall, and it's converted from AMI funding to DEL funding, which means although it's a supplement to our Northern Ireland block, it is 10% less than we had up until April 13. So the issue of how to address that shortfall is not the subject of this consultation. We are purely concerned with a method of entitlement and some associated issues such as adjustments, in-year adjustments, and there's also issues around the appeal system and so on. So there's some subordinate issues in there as well.
Previously, there was a bid to some £1.8 million for the IT system and one of the monitoring rounds. What sort of costs in terms of IT should we expect in terms of this?
Well, it's a kind of chicken and egg thing here, because this consultation is required to allow LPS to allow us to design the scheme, allow LPS then to go out to procurement on that. So we don't know the costs yet. So.
Which is why we're sort of going out early at this stage to determine there could be different costs associated between the two models, even between Model A and Model B in the consultation paper itself.
But we certainly believe that in the longer term, Model A has the greatest potential for administrative savings, and if you have administrative savings, that allows you to award more.
Does that apply to the IT side as well?
And that should apply to the IT side. I mean, currently, Model B is effectively a modification of the current housing benefit system. It is there are a lot of adjustments required, you've got non-dependent adjustments and so on. There's a lot of administrative intervention required under Model B.
You've included just 2 models in this. Why just the 2?
Well, I suppose we had tested a lot of the other models through the previous. We've kind of narrowed the things down. We've undertaken 2 separate consultations with a lot of very active engagement from the advice sector and active engagement from this committee as well. So we've kind of narrowed it down. By the time we've got to a 3rd consultation, we don't have a wide, we don't have a menu of options anymore. We think that the 2 that we have presented here are those that are deliverable and those that will do the job.
I mean, by way of illustration, Model B is by and large what Model 8 was in the previous consultation.
Remember, I think we got up to 11 models the last time. Which,
Because the committee didn't discount Model 7
No.
in the previous
But
consultation.
even for this consultation, there were a couple of other options that we looked at, but we discounted them for various reasons, and we have put a wee bit about that in Annex D in
yes,
the consultation
we
paper.
have explained in Annex D in the consultation paper those other options that we did look at and the reasons why they were dismissed.
Okay, members, any questions?
I mean, the consultation opened on the 17th of November. We have already written to NICFA. NICFA have played a key role in the previous consultations in terms of getting together all the key members in the advice sector, and we've had a number of seminars, and we'd like to do the same. And I was in contact with them yesterday about setting something up fairly soon.
So consultation will go until February.
Yes, that's right.
What happens after that? What's the timetable?
Well, in February, we will we'll analyse the results of the consultation. We'll undertake any further analysis that is required. We'll complete any quality impact assessment that is needed, and we'll present that to the Minister, and a decision will be made, and that will allow LPS to proceed with specifying their new system.
Okay. Content, members? All right. Thanks again, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next session then, members, is the OECD review of public governance. This has been allocated 30 minutes. Can I refer members to pages 109 to 121 of your topics?
What page did you say?
109 to 121.
Sorry.
Morning.
Morning. Morning. Okay, members, can I welcome Dr. Bernie Stewart, the head of the Public Service Reform Division of DFP, to the table, and Ms. Rachel McAfee, Principal Economist in the same division. Doctor, do you want to give us a brief opening statement in terms of where things currently sit?
Yes, thank you very much for inviting us here this morning. So I'll give you a quick overview of where we are just on this public governance review. So the review, the executive agreed to the public governance review in June of this year. It'll be the first sub-regional public governance review that the OECD have done. They've done a number of comparisons with other countries, but they're quite interested in doing a sub-regional review for the first time. The OECD, as you know, is a member state organisation, and they have a lot of experience and benchmarks of good examples of good practice across the world, and we hope to benefit from that. The terms of reference which we sent to you have just been finalised in the last week or so, and you will see from the paperwork that we have 3 overarching themes. The 3 overarching themes are improving operational delivery, improving strategic direction, and public engagement. These themes are subdivided into nine sub-themes, which are defined also in the terms of reference. And you'll note from the sub-themes that they are cross-cutting types of issues that will affect public sector delivery right across the board, such as procurement, leadership, that type of thing. You'll note also that there's a lot of reform already underway in the civil service and also in the public service. So this isn't designed to be a starting point from scratch saying there's no reform here, what can we do? It's more to take stock of what's underway already, of which there is a lot, what needs to be done, and to benchmark some of that against good practice. So say, is there more we need to be doing? Is there something that we can do differently? The review is not also about finance. It's about, obviously it will affect finances in the longer term if we make improvements to our services, but it's really about the method of service delivery. So the approach is a two-stage approach. The first stage, the OECD will do a benchmarking analysis of how the Northern Ireland public sector compares against the three themes that I mentioned. The second phase will then look at a number of case studies. Now, these case studies are in the process of being determined, but they can be things like an example of something that's been done well in Northern Ireland, and to say, well, this could be rolled out further across the public sector. It could be something to say the performance is average and other countries do such and such a thing to make it better. So at the end of it, there'll be a report in November 2015, which gives us an analysis of the first stage and together with recommendations which emanate from the case studies. The method of collection of the data in the first stage will be through what the OECD call the mission, in which they come for a concentrated period of time of a week, probably expected to be February. But prior to that, they issue questionnaires, which we're in the process of finalising with them at the moment. And these questionnaires give them a lot of information in which to base their desk analysis and to allow them to formulate the questions that they'll ask at the mission phase. That will involve engagement with other departments, both public sector and central government. It will involve other stakeholders and key players. We don't yet know who exactly that they'll be asking to talk to, because that will depend on the outcome of the first phase. In terms of the cost, then the cost has been agreed. It's approximately £500,000, and the business case has been approved on that basis, and that includes both phases. In terms of the governance, the executive agreed it, and they then agreed to have an executive subcommittee, set up an executive subcommittee on improving public services, and that constitutes the DFP minister, the junior ministers from the First and Deputy First Minister's office, and ministers from the biggest spending departments, which is Justice, Education, Health and Environment, and other ministers to be represented as necessary as the topics include their areas of expertise. So they met in September and agreed the final terms of reference. And the next stage for them will be to have a look at these case studies which are currently under development. So that's a brief run through of where we are, and you've got the themes. I can go through them if you like, but maybe if you just want to ask questions
just go through
at that
the themes.
stage.
That'd be useful.
Okay.
If you want to go through the...
You want me to go through the themes? Yes. Okay. So, as I said, we have three overarching themes. The first one is improving strategic approaches. The second one is improving operational delivery of services to citizens and businesses in Northern Ireland. And the third is improving engagement with people. So, underneath those, then, we have 2 or 3 sub-themes. So under the strategic approaches, we're particularly looking at enhancing outcomes for people, which is delivering cross-cutting and multi-sector reform. So underneath that would be things such as partnerships, joined-up working, how reform is led. So it's really that aspect of things. So it's the overview of how reform happens. The second sub-theme is early intervention and prevention. And again, this is about demand management, how we can improve outcomes by investment early on and preventive approaches. The third sub-theme, strategic human resource management, leadership, innovation and design, how we can bring about an innovative culture within the public sector. The fourth sub-theme, digital governance, and again, you'll be very much aware of a lot of the digital interventions that have already happened, such as shared services. So it's how good are we at that, and how that can be expanded. Open data, data sharing, big data, and then is the next theme. And then use of ICT for citizens use is the next sub-theme. Improving operational delivery, then we have openness, transparency and accountability, and that'll be looking at areas such as public audit, freedom of information. Procurement reform is sub-theme number 6, and innovations in procurement will be considered as part of that. The 7th sub-theme, streamlined regulation and processes, and the 8th one is restructuring for more effective government. So this can be to improve efficiency and effectiveness and alternate models of service delivery. So it could be, for example, relating back to the first theme where we have partnerships and so on. Shared services, new ways of working are all included in the consideration within that theme. And then the 9th theme is citizen engagement. That's under the, obviously, improving engagement with people. Below all of these sub-themes, there's a short description of what we're considering that to be, but clearly within one period of extensive research and a number of case studies, they won't be all 100% fully covered. It'll be giving us a direction of travel and some recommendations for how we can improve. So I don't think we can expect that the answers will cover absolutely everything, but it'll be, are you doing pretty well in these? Are you way behind other countries in these, or are you a leader? So I think that gives you a flavour of what we hope to get out of it.
It's a very wide range of areas to cover.
Yes, yes.
Is that going to be a challenge for you?
It'll be a challenge for OECD, I would say, yes, but they have done a number of reviews. The first of these public governance reviews they conducted, I think, was 2008, and they've done a number since then. So they have a tried and tested methodology, and I think we just need to work very closely with them to make sure it fits the Northern Ireland model that we explain to them. We've met with them on a number of occasions. We've had a lot of discussions. So it'll be a matter of them understanding how our system works so that the research period that they have is meaningful.
What kind of resource are they bringing to the table for this work?
Well, they have, their methodology involves a number of core team that of, I think it's probably 3 or 4 people, but within that then they bring subject experts. So they will have, so let's take for example digital governance. They have somebody who does a lot of work on that, and they'll pull them in and as required. In the mission itself, we've still to spell out exactly how that will work, but the way we understand it will work is they'll come a bit like a gateway review works, where they'll be in residence for a week talking to the groups of people that they think are going to give them further information on the topics that they want to explore further from the desk research. But we've yet to see exactly what those will be.
See, in terms of the, I think it was terms of reference number 8, restructuring for more effective government.
Yes.
It makes reference to new ways of working, the creation of more modern working environment for staff with more flexible and mobile ways of working, quote unquote. To what extent will the review take account of the work this committee has done in terms of the flexible working inquiry? Will the department draw that to the attention of the OECD?
Well, I think that's where we need to talk to them. That's, I think, a very good example of somewhere where there's been quite a bit of work done already. So one of the questionnaire which I referred to, which we're still finalising with them, it's very extensive. It's a 2-stage questionnaire. So the first one is, I think it's 38 pages or 40 pages. But they ask for the background that we have. So that would be the type of thing we would say on that theme. Here's a piece of work's already been done. And that's a piece, something that we'll have to do across all of the themes. Now, not just us, but the questionnaire will be issued right across government departments and arm's length bodies. So it'll be a matter of the people who are responding to that saying, well, yes, here's a piece of work's already done which you can consider. So the more information we give them on which to benchmark, I suppose, the better. But there's no doubt it's a challenge because it's quite, as you can see, quite cross-cutting. The themes are not sectoral. We deliberately steered away from that because we wanted things that can be replicated across the board. And as you can see, those kind of issues apply to everywhere.
John?
Thanks, Chair. No great objection to the OECD coming in. I mean, the one thing that strikes me probably is that the one thing we do very well in Northern Ireland is review things. Whether it ever leads to anything, I'm never quite sure. The stuff around, I mean, we've set up this, our Minister set up public sector reform division. Is this, and he hasn't answered the question of mine around, has any savings been realised yet from that? Every other department has answered and said no such savings have been realised yet. Now we're doing OECD review. Is this almost because we have absolutely a dearth of ideas in government of what real reform is about or what we're doing, set in the backdrop of?
I think the answer to your question is on its way, by the way, but no, I think is the answer to that. I think there are, as I mentioned, an innovative culture is what we're trying to achieve. And reform isn't just about saving money. Obviously, we're in a very tight financial environment, and that's a key driver for reform. But I suppose what we're looking at is reform as a transformation of the way we do things. I mean, typically you can cut 2 or 3% off something without a huge amount of pain in the first instance, but once that begins to be repeated year after year, it just means you're trying to squeeze things into a tin that doesn't fit. So you need to look at it more structurally. So Public Sector Reform Division is, we see ourselves as a toolkit for assisting other people to look at that reform. So there may be financial savings down the line, and it's a bit like the preventative spend, which we talked about last week. The intervention now mightn't save money for a while. It might save money in 10 years' time. It might never save money, but it might improve things for the same amount of money. But I think it's looking at how we do things and bringing in the partnership, working with other people. And I think that's something that typically government in Northern Ireland in the past didn't do very well. There were pockets of good practice. But if we look at the resources that are put into solving a problem, and I know you focused particularly last week when we talked on the citizen, what it feels like for the citizen. If they're getting an intervention from one part of government here and another part of government there, and maybe a voluntary organisation here, there's quite a lot of resources going in, and is that the most efficient way to use them? So I think we need to develop those kind of approaches. Hopefully it'll save money in the end, but money is not the only thing, because there's the demand management and the making the service as good as possible. So coming back to what will come out of this, there will be recommendations coming out of it. At this stage, we don't know what they'll be, but they'll be for the executive to consider, are these things that we want to do for the next programme for government, because that's really when it'll be for, to make our services better and to live within the budget we have. So yes, I would say that we've only been in existence in my division for less than a year. But even if you were to ask that question in 5 years' time, I don't see that the savings will be directly attributable to us. So we may be helping other people doing things better. So we might have an innovation lab, which we'll talk about soon, where they come up with something that improves things, and over the longer term they save money, or they give a better service. But we won't be the direct beneficiaries of that in our division.
I mean, Chair, except your point about partnership working is almost, non-existent at times in parts of government. We don't seem to be able to get departments that should be cooperating on vital issues, and then you've this whole bit about who gets the benefit if there is money saved and how you upstream some of the interventions. And I mean, any change in that, of course, are going to be welcomed. I'm at least pleased. This is due to report November 2015.
2015.
So at least it would be in time for a future programme for government, because I think it's going to be vital.
Yes, yes.
That, you know, I'm on record as saying this place would need to change dramatically if it's going to survive, because we cannot continue on. And when you go into that very tight budgetary round, I think that's going to put even more pressure on what you're delivering for, what we're delivering for every citizen.
Well, I think, I mean, the timing is good in some ways. Obviously, you always like things immediately, but if we had some kind of benchmark to say, in some of these areas, we're actually performing quite well compared to other countries, that would at least be something useful to know, or to say, we're far behind in such and such an area, we really need to take a step forward, and other countries have benefited from doing it such and such a way. I think once this is over, hopefully, it's something to take stock of where we are in delivery of public services, really.
I suppose one very quick one, does it also put some pressure on politicians, political parties to start coming up with meaningful ideas and manifestos?
Well, I think the
It's a
innovative
semi-proper
culture
programme for government.
that we're trying to develop is something that we need to develop across the public sector, politicians, officials, everybody, just to think about, is there some way we can do this better? Is there some way we can do it differently? So yes, politicians and officials, yes, everybody.
That's a leading question, John.
He's got his own policy unit.
As an independent, it's not as big as I would like.
Certainly wish you well. You have your work cut out, because I believe innovation is still a foreign word in most of the civil service. But can you tell me what particular way you intend to deal with the background to the period you're carrying out your work? We're talking here about voluntary redundancies, we're talking about changes in the structure of departments. How do you plan to handle that background to the very important work of getting information to enable improvements to be made?
Do you mean in relation to this review itself, or more generally as?
No, it's in relation to the review itself, but it's obviously a very significant background.
Well, I think that's where this early research is going to be important for the questionnaire. A questionnaire sounds, I think we all think of it as in a kind of a survey that somebody does, what are your opinion and everything. It's very much a factual based survey and research, so I think it's up to us to make sure that all of that context that you're talking about is made clear. And I think it will be made clear. So, for example, you talk about the voluntary exit scheme. When the OECD are looking at their research and looking at the personnel type issues and the human resource management and restructuring that we've asked them to look at, that'll be very much part of the context. This is what's happening at the moment. When they talk to people, people will be saying, well, we're looking at delivering improved services in the context of a reduced workforce and a reduced budget. So it's up to us in the wider sense in responding to the questionnaire to make sure that these independent people who are looking at it have the full information. And I think that's going to be very challenging. That's why we're looking very closely at the questionnaire to make sure it will elicit that information. Although we recognise the expertise of the OECD and they've done this, no one can have 100% clear view of any issue. Even looking backwards, we don't. But looking forwards, I think we can just do as much as we can to make sure they have all of the information.
But you're going to be up against, on the one hand, the silo mentality that still exists, I'm afraid, and on the other, the fact that that whole process of change needs to be managed.
I think there are benefits to doing the review at a time like this. I mean, you could say that if you work in a silo-based organisation, you don't have much incentive to change. If there's no budgetary change, you can just keep doing the same. But that isn't really a choice at the moment, because there will be a voluntary exit scheme, there will be a budgetary cut, and there will be an increased demand. All of those are certain. So therefore, to keep doing the same isn't a choice. And this is really to advise us on what might be the best changes to make in order to be able to cope with that. But I don't think this is going to be just a panacea. This is not going to say, here's all the answers. If you do all these, everything will be fine. This is here's some pointers in the right direction to help you improve things.
No, it's not a panacea, but the point I'm labouring now is that these two very different things are going on at the same time, and there must be some coordination.
Yes, yes. I don't actually think they are very different things. I think they're all part of the same mix of delivering public services. But I think you're absolutely right. You can't look at one in isolation from the other. So the budgetary background and the morale background must be taken into account in what we're looking at. And yes, and I think the whole picture is important that they see that.
I think also just to add as well that the process that the OECD adopts and the methodology is very much stakeholder engagement. So the message and the context around that will very much come across as they work through the review itself.
Thank you, Chair.
Martin?
Thank you, Dr. Stewart. Thank you, Ms. McAfee. I suppose my only question is, can it be speeded up? A year seems like a very long time to me to get the report. So we're now entered into, I presume, a time scale with our friends. But when the missionaries come in and start saving souls, are there no souls that can be saved in fairly short order? And I'm thinking in particular, will they be working with, if I'm correct, we have an innovation lab, or we're setting one up. Do we have an ideas engine too? Did I hear that?
Yes.
We have an ideas engine, and we have a change fund. So that sounds to me like three places within government where we're trying to make the changes which will make a difference, and we're trying to do them in fairly short order. So a year does seem a long time. Can there be any wins? Can the missionaries deliver it in, say, May of next year? Does everyone have to wait to the next programme of government? Some of us could be in Milltown Cemetery by the time the next change moves out. So that's.
Well, I think we share your impatience, but I suppose what we're saying is that our Public Sector Reform Division is not just sitting waiting for this OECD review. Things like the lab, the ideas engine, and the work that Rachel's team is undertaking on economic benchmarking and so on, we're doing that already. We have a business consultancy service looking at reform and transformation. I suppose this is really to give us an overall benchmark as to how we're doing. We're still moving in the right direction with the work we're doing at the moment, but we'd like an overview of it. In terms of whether it can be speeded up, the OECD only produce reports twice yearly, once in April and once in November. I don't think it will be just that we don't see anything between now and next November. That's the formal date for when they stamp the final printed copy at their meeting in Paris in November. We expect to see drafts and have conversations with them. So once the first phase is over, we would expect them to be saying what the findings are beginning to look like. The case studies themselves, clearly they'll be giving us some information about those as well. So I don't think it'll be that we can't act on what's coming out of it before that, but the formal report will be November.
Thank you, Chair. I think speed is of the essence. I think the public want to see us doing this type of work, but I think they also want to see us doing it as swiftly as possible.
Ian, follow on from that?
Yeah, I suppose it's sort of the fault. You mentioned the consultation was about 40 pages.
The questionnaire.
Questionnaire, sorry.
The consultation is 400.
The questionnaire, sorry.
How many ones?
Surely, the longer the consultation, the less time people will have to do it. In fact, if I had a 40-page questionnaire, I probably wouldn't complete it. So how do you actually get people to engage in this process?
This questionnaire isn't for the general public.
I'm talking about the civil service. You know, I don't. You know, if there was 108 MLAs handed a 40-page questionnaire, you'd get a very. And that's not that we've no desire to be involved in whatever it may be. But you know, let's be real. 40 pages is in my opinion, far too big of a document for anybody to take part. You'd either get partly filled or not filled at all, and that's certainly one fear I have. You know, and it'll take the year to get through all of these. You know, I understand if it's a 40-page questionnaire, I can understand the reason for the year, but I certainly think it's too much, and I don't think you'll get enough engagement and as the right type of responses, because people will end up just by the end of it, they'll either get into 1 or 2 word answers if they respond to it at all. So how do you get people to engage in that?
I think maybe it's not like a consultation survey questionnaire. It's a factual series of questions. So in some cases, the parts of the questionnaire will only need to be filled in by one body, such as our own Department of Finance and Personnel, because, for example, on the HR, they want to know what our system of HR is like. So it's a factual answer which one person will supply. So it's not that every department has to say, this is what we think of our HR system. This is how it works, this is how the reward and recognition part works, this is how recruitment works, this is how the pay system works. So it's factual, and it's a bit like what the chairman referred to, the flexible working section. They want to know what flexibilities are available to public servants. So part of it is fact-finding as opposed to what you would normally think of as a survey. So it's not an opinion-based survey. So hopefully, I mean, we are going to assist as far as possible, and that's why we're having the discussions with the OECD before we issue it to people, to make sure that whatever bits are unclear, that we can clarify those for people, or even possibly answer them ourselves in some occasions. But yes, it's going to take a bit of time to do.
It is. Thank you.
Paul? Thank you. I go back to the enhancing outcomes for people, and appreciate that we've all heard of what's happening, and that's one of the key principles, is enhancing the outcome for the people. At the end of the day, what we're hearing about cuts and everything else, we haven't actually heard, yes, they cut services, but we haven't heard that people are disappearing from organisations while they're cutting services. They're just not doing it because they're using that as a tool to actually lever in more pressure. And I've seen it, and I know what happens, and it's going on at the present moment in time. And Department of Health is probably one in question. It's a culture that we have to overcome, and it's this openness, which is number 5, openness and transparency and accountability. And I don't see any of that, unfortunately, within several departments. You know, yes, they give you a form of breakdowns of what's happening and where money's going. It doesn't give you detail. And unfortunately, and some of us wouldn't mind spending a month looking through detail, because I guarantee you there's an awful lot going on. You know, I've had one whistleblower who came to me from one department within the government who actually stated he worked in an office where there was enough work for one person and there was 15 of them. And he's going on record on that. He's willing to. And he says, and whenever some work does go in, he says it's a matter of, oh, I'm not doing that, you take responsibility for that. Nobody wants to take responsibility. They might spend a week filling in this 40-page questionnaire, a response, and they might take it out of government time to do it. I might say that it'll not be done in their own time.
We have to go off in stress after having filled it in.
You know, I'm being quite. I know I am a total sceptic in relation to how some delivery works. We seem to have 212,000 civil servants working in our civil service in Northern Ireland, yet we do not deliver for the public. We have plenty of people, but we are not delivering. And if you ask the general public, and maybe it's the media are putting out this story, but obviously it's not just them, because the message we're getting is nothing's happening. You know, our lights are going out, we're not getting them put on again. But unfortunately, the boy that works putting the lights off, he got the sack. You know, he's still there. But, you know, you might get your lights on or you might not. It's just a matter of, we'll work to rule in another fashion. And that's what I start to think. And I do understand the process. I come from working in a firm where whenever people had issues and you wanted to discuss it, we got together and we got it sorted out. We didn't actually hold a session where you're going away for a week to sort something out. You actually sat down and made change there and then, reacted immediately to deal with it. And it happens in private sector day and daily. They can react, and they do react immediately to change, and it has to happen. And if the work's not there, you actually have to get rid of people, and that's done in a way that has to be dealt with in a proper way forward. And if the budget isn't working out, I appreciate we're going to have some difficulty, but it's how do we ensure that we're enhancing the outcome for people, and how is this process going to ensure that that is the key function, as opposed to just what way should I put it, a tick box, which I sometimes think we're just going through a process of saying we're doing this, we've got the innovation labs, we've got all of these things, we're doing it all. But unfortunately, if the outcome is not happening to the general public, it's not happening. And that's the message the public are giving us. These are doing nothing. And we're getting that message. They're blaming us for it. And if they're not, I'm not going to take the blame, because we tell you, I'll start to fight back, and we need to find out who in the civil service isn't willing to engage and deal with it.
I think you raise a number of issues there.
You thought I was depressing.
I think there's a few issues, a number.
Politicians aren't the only ones going to take the blame here, you know. Civil servants are going to have to.
But there are individual issues and there are overall issues. What this review is designed to do is to say, I mean, you, for example, mentioned number 5, openness and transparency. That should say to us, it won't give us the solution, but it will say, your government processes are very open, or they're not very open, and you need to do something about it. And you sit quite badly compared to other countries or not. So in some of these...
I'm not looking at other countries. Forget about other countries. It's what the general public see here. And whenever I ask questions of a government department and I get a roundabout answer, yes, it's an answer, but it doesn't tell me anything. How is that open and transparent?
Well,
they'll tell you, oh yes, we are open.
But the OECD should be saying, well, they might not. They might say, well, actually, you could do such and such a thing to improve that. But the other issue you mentioned about individual pockets of bad practice, I mean, we do actually have processes already to deal with that. I think that is a separate issue. If people are not dealing with underperformance, and you say it's happening in businesses every day, it's happening in the civil service and in the public service as well. But that's more individual pockets, because I don't think we can all tar everybody with the same brush. But this is to give an overview of what's it like in general.
I'm starting to tar a lot with the same brush, unfortunately, because I'm seeing it day and daily. I'm starting to get an overall picture which is very depressing, that there is a culture of actually avoiding doing and delivering for the public.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what this independent body says about that, because, I mean, these, as you can see, these themes should give us that picture. So is the picture as you say? If it is, they will give us recommendations to fix it?
It's very simple. You give people an opportunity and you say, do you phone a government office? Yes. How quick is that phone call answered? Oh, it's answered within 3 minutes, or 3 rings, or whatever that might be. That doesn't tell you actually speak to the person. It might well be answered, not by a person, but by a machine. So therefore, it is logged. How many times do you have to contact that government department to get a resolution to it? I couldn't actually get speaking to somebody, so I ended up hanging up. And umpteen people tell us that, and they end up coming to our offices because we've maybe got other lines that we can actually speak to somebody who does actually have a pulse. Unfortunately, they're ending up speaking to a machine, and it just puts frustration into the whole system. And they say, oh, we answer 94% of calls are answered in 3 rings. Doesn't mean the problem's dealt with. Nothing.
Well,
those are the sorts of, and if you say those sorts of things, it'll send out a message, oh, everybody's getting a response. They're not.
But I think one of the things you're talking about really is the difference between an output measure and an outcome measure, which is one of the issues that has been raised by the Carnegie Trust, because you could say, we've answered the phone 1,000 times. Yeah, and as you say, that doesn't tell you anything. But if your objective is to solve people's problems, and I think it was looking at what it looks like from the citizen's point of view in the measures that you set in the first place, then, and that partly is covered by that, are we aiming to achieve outcomes, or are we aiming to achieve a number or an output? And I think if we set the target in the first place and the objective in the first place, clearly we will get to where you want to be. It may be that we have a long way to go. It may be that some of these areas are very good, but we'll know when we see what they say.
If I may also add then, Bernie, about the themes in the terms of reference, they're deliberately quite granular to drill down into those very issues around outcomes, transparency and so on, to shed light on where we can improve as well. So I think that there will be some and quite granular solutions as well that OECD would recommend based on similar approaches elsewhere.
A couple of just brief questions. In terms of the statutory committees in the Assembly, given a lot of this is cross-cutting. How will they be consulted as part of this process? And also, in terms of the final report next November, when will the committee be briefed in terms of the review, and will it be briefed before the report is published?
We would expect to do that. We still are very much in the development stages of the process, so we've been concentrating really on getting the questionnaire finalised and getting our heads around what the mission is going to look like. But each individual department will be putting input and will be talking to the people who are here at that time. So when we see that, I think we'll have a better understanding of what kind of engagement is needed with the committee. But yes, we would be taking the appropriate steps. At this stage, I don't know what those are until we know the process a bit better.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
By the way, let us know if Ian fills in his questionnaire.
No change. It seems everybody.
It'd be interested to see what the returns are.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Stewart. Thank you.
Thank you and apologies for using it.
I started them off. I apologise. I should have started them off.
No, thank you. Okay, members, moving on to the briefing on Public Sector Innovation Labs. We're just slightly behind time. I welcome Mr. Malcolm Beattie, Head of Innovation Branch and PSRD, and refer members to the following documents, pages 123 through to 139, which include presentation slides, VFP update and ministerial press release. I want to make some brief introductory comments before we go to questions.
Yes, well, I'll just maybe run through what the Innovation Lab is. I've mentioned it in passing at the last session there and last week. But innovation labs are a method of problem solving, and they're a feature of a lot of public sector, well, they feature in the public sector worldwide. I think at the last count there were 43 public sector innovation labs in existence doing various things. Some of these labs examine social issues of strategic and national importance, but others concentrate on really tactical solutions at a local level. So, for example, it could be in terms of dementia. One that we had seen was looking at a particular app to help people shop in a particular shopping centre in England to make their lives easier. So, at one level, it can be very strategic, and it could be right down to local level. Taking account of this scene, our minister decided to set up a Northern Ireland Public Sector Lab to look at developing this new way of working, a new way of problem solving. The way it works in summary is there's a period of upfront research to address a particular problem that is put to the lab by what's called a sponsor, but it's somebody who has the problem. You bring together a range of stakeholders to help solve that problem. It could be people who, using the example of dementia again, people who care for people with dementia, people with dementia, medical people, social care people, policy makers and so on, plus experts. And they then come together to develop a solution, and then depending on what type of lab it is, it could be a series of high-level recommendations to be taken forward and considered, or could be specific actions. Our lab has been developed. We have done a lot of international research to see how to set it up. We have taken advice from the Cabinet Office, from Nesta, which used to be part of the Cabinet Office and now is a research area. We've taken advice from Marco Steinberg, who is on our Minister's Advisory Council and who was previously involved with the Helsinki Mind Lab, or Helsinki Citra Lab. There's other labs that we've visited, some in France, Copenhagen and Kent, Flanders to name, but the ones we haven't visited, we've done extensive research on them. So what we have decided to trial is to try to approach problems covering all of those areas, from the strategic right down to the tactical. We've set aside approximately, we reckon each lab would cost approximately £10,000 to £15,000 in terms of securing an expert to help. and in terms of the accommodation. Our next lab, we've done one already, a regulatory impact assessment, and we did a trial one on the Ideas Engine, which Martine mentioned there earlier. We've one on innovative procurement, one on big data, and one on reward and recognition. We have a few others in the pipeline as well. And some of you mentioned earlier, why are we doing this now when budgets are tight? And I think this is a very good time to try a new approach. Malcolm will talk in a bit if you'd like to find out a bit more detail about the regulatory impact assessment one and how it worked well in bringing different viewpoints together in the one room at the one time, where people maybe were consulted individually previously and couldn't get a picture of what other people thought. But it so far has worked very well for us. The lab itself, you've got a presentation in that, and if you like, Malcolm can go through the detail, but in summary, what this presentation sets out is how does a lab help you solve a problem, what types of lab you have, what problems are not suitable for a lab, what problems are, how you define the problem, how you define who needs to be there, what kind of approaches do you take, and really then some examples of labs that we have in the pipeline. Some we know are definitely happening, some we're still in discussions with people, and some we're still at the early stage to see whether it's suitable. In terms of how we have marketed the lab, we've really engaged with departments and other bodies to tell them what's possible. So our pipeline has come from discussions with interested parties. So that's a very brief run through of what our lab is, so we're happy to answer any questions.
Malcolm, you were going to run through the
regulatory impact one?
Yes, I can tell you a bit about that. The last few slides in the deck, I'll just give you some headlines on that. We ran this innovation lab with our colleagues in DETI in the end of June, and they were concerned that regulatory impact assessments, which are a compulsory aspect of all new regulations, to estimate the impact or the cost of new regulation on business. They're concerned about how well they were being done and their effectiveness in informing ministers and policymakers as to the real economic impacts of regulation. So they asked the question, are they being done well, and do they need to be independently scrutinised? So that question came to us, and what we did, that we talked extensively to our colleagues in DETI. We looked at what we call the ecosystem, who all is impacted and involved in this, and as Bernie has been saying, not only internally but externally. And to come really cut to the chase, for those three days, we convened a group of people together comprising policy officials from some departments, some of our economists, but crucially an independent expert on regulatory impact assessments. And then also crucially, we had a representative from CBI there and from the Federation of Small Businesses. We were joined at various points by other people who had peripheral interests in it, and we had a very rich discussion looking at this problem of imposing further regulation on business and understanding the real costs of it. And as a result of that, we came to the conclusion, and we were able to say back to the ETI, now, you asked us, do these regulatory impact assessments require independent scrutiny? And the group's view was they certainly do. But the benefit of the lab was that in a 3-day concentrated effort, we had all the right people in the room, and we got all the perspectives in a rich debate, and we actually were able to say to DETI, yes, you've asked us that question, but here's another list of things you also need to take account of. And one of them, which is fed into the red tape review, which was published by DETI, I think last week, was the need to consider whether we impose regulatory budgets on departments. And that came out because we had brought that group together, and the group saw the burden regulation places on business, and internal officials heard it, if you like, from the business perspective, and we're able to relate and understand it from that perspective. And equally, our external colleagues, they saw where policy officials were coming from. But in summary, the benefit of the lab was that in 3 days we had produced answers for DETI, and we gave them a far richer package of recommendations than they would have got. They had originally intended to put the question out to the consultancy market, and we did it internally then. So it worked well. We learned a lot of lessons out of it, and that is now feeding into the labs that we have in plan. In fact, we're starting one this coming Monday, and we're looking at the subject of procurement, innovative procurement, and how the public sector could make better use of the rules that already allow for more creative procurement.
What were the practical difficulties of that? You know, in terms of the 3 days, was everybody around the table 9 to 5? Because obviously there's a lot of sectors and a lot of people you need to get round the table.
Yes.
How difficult was setting that up?
Well, we had a 3-month planning phase, and one of my team, amongst other things, focused on building a rich research document, and then also identifying who those key players were. And then we invited them, and they gave a commitment to be there for the 3 days, and they stayed in the evenings and so on. So you not only had them in the room for the day, but they spent the evenings together, and in that social environment as well. It helps to continue the conversations, and it really enriched the output. So once you get the commitment, people were committed to it, and they came and they stayed, and we got the result.
In terms of the 14 recommendations, have any of those been implemented yet?
Yeah, most of them fed into the red tape review that has just been published by DETI. So we made an important contribution to that.
In terms of the list on page 133, how do you determine the order of what labs are going to be put in place? I mean, obviously, eminent or innovative procurement, big data, reward and recognition, but preventative spend is some way down the line. So how do you determine what your priorities are?
I think that depends on when we've been approached by the subject and the state of readiness that the sponsor department is in understanding the question they want to ask us. So at the minute, what you see there is really more or less the order in which they've come to us, and the position we are actually at in understanding with the sponsoring department the actual issue they want to grapple with. So,
and does that come from a senior level, or does it come from individual units within the department?
It tends to come. It comes from different levels. Bernie has been round and met a lot of the management boards and a lot of various groups of officials, and some are immediately interested in this as a methodology, and others may not at this minute see any value in it. So it just depends on who warms to the subject and who is an interest and can see value in it, and they come to us, and then we spend a lot of time understanding the question it is that they want to ask. And so it's a very collaborative exercise, this. It's about really getting to grips and understanding the detail of a question.
If I could just maybe come in there, I think longer term, if we had more of a pipeline, we would then think of criteria in which to prioritise the order. I mean, things that are going to have an immediate saving, or things that are going to have an immediate effect, or are aligned very closely with the programme for government. But as Malcolm says, it's been a marketing phase so far, and I think we're learning as well that we had set a 3-month period up front to define the problem and to do the research. But some of these topics have required a little bit longer than that to actually become clear what the problem is. Some it's clear up front. So we're building in, as we learn, the various flexibilities in that. So I think once we've done a few more and some of those are completed, we'll be able to maybe tailor that process and that prioritisation process a bit better.
And will they all take that sort of format? You know, get everybody around the table for a number of days?
Yes.
What's the range of that? Does it go from 3 to? I'm just trying to scope out, you know, how have they done it in Denmark and other places? You know, is it around this model?
This model is based on Finland and what Marco Steinberg has done there in the Helsinki Citra Lab. So there are different ways of doing this, and I think it would be fair to say we've adopted this model and we're flexible enough to see, does it work? Does the compressing it into 2-3 days together, is that the best way of doing it? Or for some subjects, it may require a slightly different approach. So we're not wedded to it, but we want to see if this actually works for us.
We're also going to try a mini lab approach for some topics just to see how that works, which is a smaller problem, just and a more focused approach for something that doesn't require all of this research. We haven't tried that yet.
It might have been the case that departments, when you're talking about mini labs, would departments maybe take it upon themselves just to do it in-house if they know what the format?
They could do. I mean, once the expertise of how to do it becomes clear. But one of the things that struck me certainly about it when I first looked at this model is the person who owns the problem is not in the room for the 3 days. Now, they can come and do part of the presentation, and they certainly do some of the presentation of the problem and some of the background. But part of the method of this is that you're getting other people looking at it, the stakeholders. So quite often you would have a preconceived idea when you have a problem of what the answer is, and you could therefore have an undue influence on ruling out things that actually might work quite well. So we're still exploring that.
That's a very good point. I must say, I read this, I was quite encouraged, and I certainly hope that it does work. But one of the difficulties in these things is actually getting the maximum cooperation from people, and with them coming with an open mind. You need people who have experience there, not just the ones who are currently doing the work, the ones who know how similar work, and this is where the comments start coming in, you know, in other places. And you mentioned the Finnish experience is an excellent one. Stockholm, I don't know whether that was included. They're very radical in their approach. But one of the things I see here, we're talking about a lovely one here on page 132, talking about making a difference by creating space. But the particular one is make mistakes. Now, I personally subscribe to that, you know, coming from the business background, you know, that's how you had to do it. You had to make decisions, you didn't always get it right. But we know that the general culture in the civil service is risk averse. How do you overcome that bit? And do you introduce other people here, perhaps from some other discipline, at these meetings? Do you film the meetings, for example, for educational use? And could we perhaps maybe sit in on one?
Oh,
they're not filmed.
3 questions there, yeah. One of the things we're examining very carefully, and a lot of the thinking internationally, is about having people with a design background in these events, because they come and look at problems from a completely different perspective to us here in the public sector. So the mix of people in the room is vital to success, and one of the key players in every one of these events is what we call the subject matter expert, who could be from an academic who's recognised across the islands or in Europe, or someone from another jurisdiction who has very successfully grappled with a particular problem. And one of the things we do in those 3 months in talking to the sponsoring department is identifying who the expert ought to be. So that's the first thing we want to have in every one of these, an independent academic or practitioner who can bring real rigour to the process. We also have a facilitator there as well to help get the creative juices going and to get people out of their comfort zone and out of the risk-averse attitude. And then, as I said, we are seeing internationally a lot of emphasis on getting this design skill into the labs, and we're looking at that now. We've been talking to various experts, and they tend to look at problems from a completely different perspective. So I think that's your first question. The second question, no, we're not filming them, and I'm sure we'd be quite happy to allow you to, or to invite you along and observe one of these in flow, certainly. I'm happy to do that, yeah.
Thank you.
Just in terms of the subject expert, how do you ensure that he or she does not have an undue influence on the outputs? Especially if there's other experts that have totally contrary views.
Well, that's something that the richness of the mix in the room is about, because that expert is not leading the event. They're there to give the perspective and the detail, but they're not there to lead it. It's a collaborative thing, and the output has got to be that which is agreed by the group.
How are the group and the experts selected and identified?
I have a slide here, which I'm sorry, I don't have the same page numbers as yourselves, but it's the third picture from the end. That helps.
Looks like a flower.
It's like a flower, yes. It's called. We've labelled that the ecosystem.
135.
Yeah, thank you. That is meant to depict exactly what you've mentioned, Chair. It's looking at who is impacted by this particular question, either directly or indirectly, as a service user, service provider, academic expert.
But even within that,
Yeah.
I mean, I could think of a number of areas where you go through the business sector, policy, legislators, economists, and you'll have two different arguments in each one.
Yes.
You know, so
And
there still is a risk that you could
there
pick
is
one from
certainly-
every area, but they're
And that-
on one side of the argument, if you know what I mean.
In that instance, in our consultation with the sponsoring department, if it becomes clear they're very distinct views, then we bring both sides in.
I think that's part of the thinking of the 3 months, and defining the problem. That's become clearer to us that it is really important that you have everybody that needs to be represented there. So people maybe sometimes think the problem is one thing, and then when they discuss it a bit, the problem is reframed slightly. And then it's looking at that whole diagram to say, have we got somebody from all of that? Have we everybody represented? Who would be the most important person to have from that sector? Is there another viewpoint? And I think it's thinking outside the box, really. Is there somebody else here who could really usefully contribute to this? And the facilitation is key.
Okay, Michaela, then Paul.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. It's just, where I have a difficulty with is we are losing a lot of our young graduates to other countries, and they are coming out of universities with very good, bright, innovative ideas. And I'm just wondering, I appreciate that we need people that are academic experts and have the experience in that field, or in particular fields. But is there any of our young graduates involved in that, or is there any consideration that will be given to them?
Yeah. Well, we have a number of researchers who work in my team, and one's a PhD graduate, and they've all come out of that sector. In relation to the subject matter expert, I suppose by definition is someone's got a lot of experience. But one of the things we've been talking to some of the universities about at the minute is when we need a specific piece of research done on a given subject, we would want to see if they can put one of their postgraduate people our way, and on a mutual cooperation, give them the opportunity to extend their learning, but also to serve us, and that's one way we could do it. In relation to designers, we've been talking to people in other labs who use them, and they tend to use people who are young and just out of the learning arena. So there are opportunities certainly to answer your question and to address that in this process.
And we've had discussions with the two universities about that type of approach, maybe the research approach. We hope to expand it a bit more.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Okay, Paul.
Thank you. Just looking at the model here, I'm just wondering, do the size of the bulges in this make any representation to the representation that they have on those bodies? And I think, I'm just thinking in relation to the business sector, and I'll just use one example, if it's farming, You're dealing with farming in one of the very regulated areas.
Yeah.
And I know John might have some interest in that, but it's maybe over-regulated in many areas simply because it has been set up maybe to ensure that somebody has a job within Donald House down here, that they have a little bit of responsibility, whether that's to count posts that are put in and make sure that they're put in straight lines and all this. I'm just wondering, I just want to find out, is those bulges any representation to the size of on those panels? No.
No, not in that diagram certainly, because it's just to give you a picture of just the different groups that we looked at.
I appreciate it. And just to come back to the experts, I appreciate that emphasis is put upon those that have coming from an academic background in relation to that. Not that we want to put those that have spent a lot of public time and money, or a lot of time, their time and public money, getting a very good qualification and maybe little experience. Sometimes experience within an industry. And I think of some of the greatest business brains that we have in this province probably don't even have a third sector education qualification, yet they could buy and sell them day and daily. And even from an economic point of view, they've probably more knowledge. Is there any consideration given to ensure that you have that type of expertise, not just an academic, because we've heard plenty of academics who can make an argument for or agree, disagree, and come back on Leslie's point. One academic can say, or the chair's point, one academic can say one thing and you get another academic making a very strong case, complete contrary. But that's what they've made their job out of, as opposed to those who've got the expertise of working in an industry or delivering service for many years and how that has worked out for them.
Yeah, and that's a very valid point. And when we look to see who has the best knowledge, that may be from the academic arena, but it could also be someone who has delivered very successfully, either in business or in delivering some public service, and they wouldn't necessarily have an academic background, but they have been very successful. So they would have equal value in coming forward and bringing their expertise into the lab.
Depends on the problem, very much really, on the subject matter. But I think it's important to go around the whole circle to say, have we got everybody who's interested in this? So the regulatory impact assessment was a good example where it affects people who make the legislation, regulators, people who have to enforce it. It's people who are impacted by it, big businesses, small businesses. So every problem will have its own set of stakeholders, and it's a matter of considering them all. But I think that research period up front, even if you're not a participant in the lab, let's say you're looking at dementia, the research up front looks at a lot of research, so the people in the lab have access to speakers who come in on specific topics for maybe half an hour piece of research. So they should have a concentrated piece of information really bombarded at them.
Well, you make mention about dementia, and I appreciate that it's an area within the health department which is a growing sector problem. Did this harebrained idea of paying doctors actually to do their job, give them an extra £50 for actually diagnosing something that they should have diagnosed, is that something that came about through maybe some of this process? No.
No,
I appreciate that's on a GB basis and not here, but you know.
No, not as far as we know.
I'm glad to hear, because those are sorts of, that's just. I see a man being paid to do a job. Unfortunately, if he's not diagnosing somebody, as soon as you mention that he's going to get a bonus for doing it, eventually does it. It's a bit like operations at the moment.
Quick question just to conclude, in terms of the next 3 labs on the list, when are they due to report?
Sorry, Chair.
The imminent
labs.
The innovative procurement will run next week, and we should have feedback from that by the end of January. The reward and recognition will happen in January, so if you, as a few weeks after that, we get outputs from it. The big data is planned for January as well, so, and that we should have those under our belt by the.
That's quite quick. And then in terms of the planning stage and those at the potential stage? You talking about the next 6 months for those?
Yes.
Okay, thank you both very much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, members can advise that 2 proposals for SLs are to be considered and that departmental officials are available to come to the table if members have any queries on either proposal. First is SL1 Civil Partnership Amendment Regulations NI 2014, pages 141 to 147 of your packs. I advise members the purpose of the SR is to amend the Civil Partnership Regulations NI 2005 to increase the time limit for service of the Civil Partnership Notice on the Register form from at least 14 days before the date of the intended civil partnership to at least 28 days before the date of the partnership. An amendment will also be made to the time limit for payment of fees in respect of attendance of the registrar. The rules intended to give effect to the Home Office's new referral and investigation scheme in respect of sham marriages and sham civil partnerships, for which the Immigration Act 2014 provides. The rule will be subject to negative resolution. Any questions? No, happy enough. Members content to put the question. The committee has considered DFP's proposal for supporting legislation under Civil Partnership Amendment Regulations NI 2014 and has no objection to the policy implications of the proposed legislation at this stage. Agreed?
Agreed.
SL1 Marriage Amendment Regulations NI 2014, pages 149 to 155. The purpose of the SR is required in similar vein as the previous rule, but on this occasion is to amend the Marriage Reg NI 2005, i.e. to increase the time limit for service of the marriage notice from at least 14 days to 28 days. For consistency, a similar amendment will be made to the time limit for issue by the Registrar's certificate in respect of legal capacity to marry, and a consequential amendment will be made to the time limit for payment of fees in respect of attendance by the Registrar. As with the previous proposal, this rule is intended to give effect to the Home Office's new referral and investigation scheme. The rule will be subject to negative resolution. Any questions? Members content to put the question. The committee has considered DFP's proposal for subordinate legislation under the Marriage Amendment Regulations NI 2014 and has no objection to the policy implications of the proposed legislation at this stage. Agreed? Agreed. Correspondence.
I think the correspondence is largely for noting. I don't think there are any decisions required. Just maybe draw members' attention to 1 or 2 items. There's 2 submissions in terms of the draft budget. One is page 181 and 184 in the main pack from the CBI and FSB. And as I think you mentioned earlier, Chair, we're drafting a report based on the evidence at the moment, and that'll be available for initial consideration next week, so they can be incorporated into the evidence base for the report. Also, there's papers, 2 papers at table papers, page 23, one on corporation tax and one on wider fiscal powers, which the department has provided in advance of next week's meeting. There's 2 oral briefings on those issues at next week's meeting. Chair. I think that's all the
in terms of that last item, the update and potential devolution of additional fiscal powers, it says as part of next steps, point 10 is page 29 of table papers. Advice with respect to the findings for each tax or duty has recently been put to the Finance Minister. These are going to the Executive, but there's no detail for the committee. So could we write to the Minister to request some further detail in terms of what the findings actually are? Okay. Moving on, committee work programme. Draft is at pages 221 to 223. Members content to proceed on that basis? Great. Any other business? Next meeting will be next Wednesday, 10th of December, 10 AM, room 30.